Good morning, everyone. As always, from the kitchen with my coffee that I always exclaim that I have, but I find myself not drinking it throughout. So I'm actually going to, try to be more intentional about that. Have a morning coffee with all of you. Today is going to be more of a fun video. Disclaimer, as always, my kids are in the background. You might hear some child sounds, but I know many of you also have kids. So, we're all here together on our morning, enjoying this video together, having a cup of coffee while our kids are in the background playing or watching a little TV show. We are going to chat about the 1950s inspired Christmas, the 1950s housewife vintage Christmas, because I find the 1950s housewife to be iconic. And although I am constantly on my channel talking about how we are not necessarily LARPing the 1950s in terms of a traditional wife lifestyle, and I've made that clear that we're not trying to necessarily go back to the past, but simultaneously I've also made it clear that I love that aesthetic myself personally. And I think that many of us gravitate towards that aesthetic not because we want to copy or go back to the negative parts of that, but because it is the closest in time in terms of having modern amenities that the homemaker was celebrated in advertisements as well as popular culture. And of course, most of the pictures I'm going to show you today are not like real people. They are advertisements, but there is something to be said in terms of sociology. People have degrees studying this stuff that you can see in terms of values shown through media and advertisements. And so every time the Christmas season is upon us, I always find so much homemaking inspiration from filling my Pinterest board with 1950s housewife Christmas aesthetic. For this reason, I wanted to bring a video today where we go through some of the pictures on this board and we discuss what we can learn from this time and just have a fun little chat about it. Before I proceed, I would love it if you would hit the like button, leave your comments down below, let me know what you find inspiration from when it comes to Christmas time and being a homemaker or a feminine woman in your life. And if you want to take it a step further and you enjoy the content and the message that I'm putting out there, please consider becoming a member because it really does support the channel, and you'll also have access to a library of content that I'm slowly building on more personal stuff over there. So first off, what I've noticed a lot when I look into the vintage housewife Christmas is that dinner parties and Christmas parties were a big deal. And I know many people have like office parties and people have family gatherings and all that kind of stuff, but the Christmas party really seems to take precedence at this time. And I just don't see a lot of advertisement and a lot of people talking or planning Christmas inspired events like neighborhood parties or like personal Christmas dinner parties in their home as of late. This might be a result of the 2020 pandemic and it just caused people to be more enclosed, but I do find that the heavily consumeristic and like superficial culture that we're dealing with today, like I've said countless times on my channel, doesn't prioritize like relationships at the forefront, rather more so like consumerism. So perhaps that's why we don't see as much of an emphasis on family gatherings. But these parties were also very elaborate. And I'm not going to say there was like no consumerism, because there were of course a lot of food advertisements catered towards like what you're going to serve at your Christmas party. But I just find it interesting that rather than like all the advertisements of toys and things under the Christmas tree, it was more so around the food and gathering. That is something I think is very important that I'd love to see us get back to. And when we are out of the RV and in our home, that is actually something that I had dreamed of. There was a home that we almost purchased that was like the perfect setup to have parties in. And although I'm not like a partier, what I mean more so is like dinner parties and gatherings. And I just totally envisioned myself having a Christmas thing, like having it known that our family has a Christmas party like a week before Christmas and invites all our friends type of thing. So that is still a dream of mine, and that's why I was so like captivated by the concept of a Christmas party. But a negative thing that I think that we shouldn't bring is the wacky food. And I actually saved a lot of pictures to show you the wacky creative food that was really pushed upon this time. And I also think that it's like a lack of access to food around the world. I recently watched the Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix, and it seems that a big inspiration for her content was based on her experiences abroad. And so I feel like with the advent of technology, we are now more so exposed to different cultures, and we can really pick these and like the best ingredients and that kind of stuff if we want to go for a more elegant type of theme in terms of our dinners. You get what I'm trying to say here. And perhaps back in the day, they had less of that. They had more of what people like to make fun of in terms of like white people food, like Jello, that kind of thing. Like more so bland things because they didn't have as much access to spices. So they could express less of their creativity in terms of the flavors, and they more so had to do it based on the shapes. I did see a recent video on TikTok of somebody talking about like the shrimp Christmas tree, and I don't necessarily think that that's bad. I think that we can bring that back into our modern times, but it was a huge hit, and it just made me laugh so much because of all these people thinking that the shrimp Christmas tree was a modern invention, but it was actually something based off of like 1950s ads and dinner parties. Next up, I want to talk about like what people call nowadays tacky Christmas, which is basically just leaning into like the mismatched ornaments, many of the different Christmas colors, the traditional Christmas colors, not necessarily embracing like the picture perfect white type of Christmas theme, tinsel, lights everywhere, no specific like organization. That's what I saw in the 1950s, really that whimsical type of Christmas that is coming back nowadays, just labeled under like tacky Christmas. And that is actually something that I gravitate towards personally, having like the mismatched Christmas. And you can kind of see it in our RV, the way that I've decorated our RV for the Christmas season, just like picking out things that are a little bit more sentimental in terms of ornaments and what my kids like and what I just like, rather than having a consistent theme. And that isn't necessarily superior or anything, but I found that it gave a very homey vibe to what the 1950s housewives were going for, that comfort Christmas, rather than feeling like you're walking into like a home decor store type of Christmas. That quintessential feeling of like bringing out the Christmas decors that are nostalgic and that are carried throughout the year in your family as a tradition. And that is also something that we've lost in terms of like heavy consumerism. People do tend to buy new Christmas decor every single year rather than having like those dedicated bins that you can reminisce on. I remember when I was a child having like the bins taken out and like remembering like, oh, this was from Christmas like 2001. This is what I made in my like second grade class. These are the pictures that we took and we made into ornaments of the first engagement with my husband, for example. That is what I'm trying to recreate here. And like everywhere we travel with our RV, I try to make it a point to buy an ornament so that I have like a tree that will be totally mismatched and tacky Christmas, but will be sentimental by the time that we're done living this current lifestyle that we have right now. But anyway, that is something that I personally loved in terms of 1950s housewife aesthetic. And you also have to understand that like people were so much more frugal back then, which also brings up a point that I just thought about now, which would be like perhaps why companies advertise in terms of food, because people were buying less materialistic things and were more so, you know, focused on the experience of the Christmas gatherings. And then let's talk about materialism. What I found is, of course, there were advertisements, like that's when it really started to ramp up in terms of consumerism. But also what I noticed was like the sentimental couple of gifts rather than like an exuberant amount of gifts that were bought. I found that like very intentional gift giving, a more of what people would call like minimalistic, was what was the norm back then. Family values were more so cherished in that time. So like things that you could actually use to have a family experience, toys that could be communally played with, for example, board games. That is what I found was more so heavily emphasized back then when it came to Christmas, rather than like what we see now, which is more like the independent, trying to get your child to build skills separate from you. How can you entertain them without having to constantly be there? That is more so the focus of kids' toys nowadays. And so that is something that I also loved, and I think that you could learn from in the past in terms of that like vintage aesthetic as well as values. And lastly, a big concept that I feel like we also don't see a lot was the emphasis on romance. Now it's very kid-centered, which isn't necessarily bad. I think that like buying gifts for your spouse and like the loved ones in your life that aren't children isn't necessarily needed in terms of like over consuming when it comes to Christmas, but emphasizing things like mistletoe, you know, bonding at your family gathering, having nice times by the fire. And I think that we're also really lacking that in today's culture, and something that I've decided this year, now that I have more energy, not like super early postpartum, I'm going to do in the days leading up to Christmas. I'm going to do like different themed nights, have like special drinks and movies with my husband to really bring that romance alive when it comes to Christmas. And I'm also, of course, a stay-at-home mom. As you can tell, it's a little chaotic in the background of the video right now as I'm trying to end it. But like buying things for my husband for his birthday and special occasions isn't something that I do. I more so prioritize like the experiences and spending quality time together. So that could also be an inspiration for you to remember to focus on the romance in your spouse in addition to your children and your family on Christmas, and to really value those experiences rather than the things. To end the video there, leave your comments down below. Let's continue the conversation. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye-bye.